What's the title of your project and where does that come from?
So the title of the project is Planning for Play. It's taken from a book by Lady Ellen of Hurtwood, who was a kind of pioneer of creative play and a child welfare advocate. She was involved in UNICEF and setting up junkyard playgrounds and amongst other things. But she was kind of quite a pivotal figure in rethinking how childhood and play kind of could develop.
Tell me, how did you first get interested in the relationship between modernism, architecture and childhood experience?
Our interest in modernism, play and so on came about really just growing up in Birmingham. I think it largely does come from a kind of quite a strong affinity to a kind of, you know, very urban place. One of my strongest memories from childhood is a kind of playing on part of a flyover or something like that. So it was kind of modern bit of cityscape that we found a kind of a play opportunity in. So that was kind of, I guess,
and it's that thing of
thinking, really.
And I think that's been is kind of a thing we're interested in, that idea of like what they call affordance. So having things that are kind of maybe there for one function, having other potential functions. And I think more directly, this sort of area of interest came out of seeing this sculpture in Birmingham that was. We subsequently found out it was by an artist named John Bridgman, and it was made, I think, in the mid-50s. And it's the only kind of remaining one of something like 20 public sculptures that Bridgman made for new housing developments in Birmingham. They were designed specifically for kids to play on. We kind of saw this sculpture quite a lot when we were going to Foundation at art school in Bourneville, and we made a drawing of it. The more you look at these things, the more you find out. So you start finding out about Aldo van Eyck and his kind of architecture, and Richard Dagner, and then kind of people like Isamu Noguchi and his kind of sculptural kind of play structures.
You've moved now more into thinking about the theoretical and the academic, the intellectual environment that has then created bespoke responses to making sculpture for specifically with the outcome of child play in public environments.
But it's also important to remember that play isn't just for children. In some respects, it's play as almost like a kind of utopian freedom, that it's not work, it's actually different to even sport and games. It's something that is completely without rules and without necessarily having an end game. It's just for its own enjoyment that we're kind of interested in, really.
The subject matter is basically kind of play structures. We play the kind of material of play, but also I think there's this idea of us playing while we're here.
It's going to be a residency where we're kind of making stuff as a live studio, so actually how things evolve will partly come from, I guess, the response to the location, and partly just things that we discover and kind of materials that we think about while we're here. And we've got a few things in mind that maybe we don't exactly want to kind of give away yet. We play, but we want to bring in a little bit of play in the kind of urban experience, really.
The past few years, our practice has been quite dominated by kind of working on sort of large-scale kind of public commissions, and we haven't maybe had the kind of luxury of a lot of studio time. That's kind of one of the other kind of sort of things we really wanted to get out of the residency, was just a kind of really dedicated period of kind of just making. So it's
R&D,
we've got this kind of subject matter and these kind of ideas and these kind of sort of potential structures that we'd like to look at. I'm kind of interested in them being very sculptural, but also having kind of potential for function as play structures, or even maybe kind of I don't know, kind of some sort of almost like furniture type things, or this kind of stuff.
The Nilsson project, it was almost a cross between a psychological experiment and an artwork, but I also do see that fascination aesthetically in your work for that moment, like the way that you collect the documentation that you've got in your archive, the photographs, the books that you collect. There's something that draws you back to that place in time.
The material that we're interested in, the kind of the stuff that we're kind of finding as our research, I think completely different things. So the Paula Nielsen, to some extent, I think there's a relation between that and the Lady Allen of Herwood, sort of junk playgrounds and those kind of things. And then you've got the more kind of structural things of something like Aldo van Eyck. They're kind of two really different approaches. I think if I had to pick one or the other, I'd sort of go towards Aldo van Eyck in terms of a kind of direct point of reference and inspiration for artwork.
When you're here, one of the partners and people you're interested in working with is the University of Sheffield, and their architect, they've got a very specialist school around architecture and childhood.
It'll be interesting to have dialogue to kind of work out whether what we think is good practice is actually seen academically as good practice.
What I see this project is doing is being sort of a grounding moment of testing, shaping, looking back at some of the things and some of the roots for where you've come from, but testing and shaping and seeing what might emerge next. It seems like a pivot moment.
We're aware that maybe criticality has to come back on us and what we're doing. It's having conversations and dialogue with people who are kind of researching areas that relate to the stuff that we're kind of interested in, and maybe finding out that actually there are people who would completely disagree with our approach. That doesn't necessarily mean we're wrong, it just means that somebody disagrees with us, and that's a kind of maybe this interesting conversation to be had. When we're doing the residency, I guess there'll be kind of the two spaces, and one will be a kind of studio kind of workshop where we're kind of producing works, and then I think the secondary space will be maybe a kind of bit of waste ground with some stuff on it that kind of comes together to make a kind of playground. So we'll be kind of hopefully making these sort of structural things that then can go into this environment that can feel like a play environment, and maybe there'll be playable things, but also it's very kind of sculptural. Hopefully people will be able to see us making things with concrete, pouring moulds, making
imagine there'll be
quite a lot of mess, maybe
concrete, polystyrene, fairly kind of basic materials, but it's going to be us kind of working there, kind of just playing with materials, as artists do.